Would you believe me if I told you that the inventor of the American sports car never went to college? We're not sure if he even graduated high school and was raised on a farm in Ohio. Because this is the story of Harry Stutz, the man who did just that. It was a cold September in 1876 when Harry Stutz came into this world, in a small town in Ohio. And coincidentally, it was also the last time that he was not holding a wrench or chasing the American dream. Now, Harry grew up on his small family farm, where he was in charge of keeping all of the farm equipment operational, making sure all the machines ran. Harry made his way through the public education system, or whatever you could say the public education system looked like in 1880s Ohio, and managed to complete his schooling. Now, instead of chasing after a higher education like college or a university, Harry ended up finding himself a couple jobs in town, but he worked until he turned 21. At the age of 21, Harry ended up having himself a bit of an early midlife crisis, where he realized that the average expected age at the time was only about 52 years old, and he was pretty quickly approaching the halfway point of life. That didn't quite sit too well with him. He needed to get out, needed to do some things, needed to make a difference in the world. And so our 21-year-old Harry decided he needed to get out of this small town. But how does a farm boy like Harry get himself out of Ohio when all he's ever really done is work a couple of small-time jobs for a sewing company and a cash register making company? You see, Harry needed mobility. And in 1897, the average car cost around $1,000, and the average tradesman made about 25 cents an hour. So what's a strapping young lad to do if he can't afford to buy himself a car? Well, in Harry's case, he decided it was rather straightforward. He's going to build himself one. So, gathering together all the parts that he could find, working it together as best as he could, using his experience as a farmhand working on the family equipment, he manages to assemble his first ever car. Now, we don't exactly know how long it took Harry Stutz to build his first ever car, but we do know that while he was still 21, he finished his car, moved out of town, got married, and started a company in a completely different town. So it couldn't have taken him that long. Now, a few years later, it was the turn of the century, 1900, and Harry Stutz decided, hey, if we got a new century, we're going to need a new car. And so obviously, if you're Harry Stutz and it's 1900, and you're trying to go ahead and get yourself a brand new car, well, you could do one of two things. You could either walk down to the local dealership and pick yourself up a brand new car, or you could go the route that Harry chose, where you start an entire business based around building car parts so that you can control the design of the parts, manufacture the parts yourself, and then use those parts to handcraft your own vehicle. And that's exactly what Harry Stutz did. He built a company from scratch just so he could get the parts for free. The company Harry started in order to make his car was Stutz Manufacturing Company. And after he'd finished his car, Harry realized he didn't really need the company anymore. And so he just sold it off to Lindsay Automobile Parts. Now in the sale, he also managed to sell himself as the manager for his own company. And Lindsay Automobile Parts bought into it and shipped him and the company both over to Indianapolis, where he continued to run his business for somebody else. Now moving to Indianapolis was the opportunity that Harry really needed, because he ended up starting his own side quest, and that side quest was aptly named Central Motor Car Company, a business that he started all because non-compete clauses didn't exist, I suppose. Now, Harry only ended up working for Lindsay Automobile for a short while, and he only ended up running Central Motor Car Company for a short time as well, as in 1904, only 2 years after he'd moved to Indianapolis, he found himself bored with running a business. So again, he sold off his business, left Lindsay Automobile, and went to go be a carburetor salesman. As it would turn out though, being a carburetor salesman is not the most enthralling thing you could do with your life, and so it only took about a year for Harry to get bored with that job as well, when he was reached out to by American Motor Car Company, because they knew that he'd handcrafted 2 cars and started multiple successful businesses. And they wanted Harry to design a car. So in 1905, Harry joined with American Motor Car Company to design their first ever production car, and then promptly left. So if Harry Stutz really liked cars this much, why would he leave a company that had just given him the chance to design their first ever production car? And the answer is actually pretty simple. He'd received an offer from a competitor, Marion Motor Car Company, again because non-compete clauses apparently just didn't exist, to come be a chief engineer and production manager, and just for kicks they threw in the extra perk of race car driver. And I mean, that's going to sell the offer in and of itself to me. Now this time around, Harry managed to stay relatively entertained working at Marion, probably due to being a race car driver there. And it took him until 1910 before he, again, got a little bit bored and decided to start side quest number 2, where he made Stutz Auto Parts Company, primarily because he wanted to produce his own transaxles, and presumably the head honchos at Marion just weren't really on board with it. Between the couple handcrafted cars and the multiple companies that he'd started along the way, Harry was really starting to kind of make a name for himself, and that name ended up coming across Empire Motor Company's radar. So they reached out to Harry and asked him to build a car for them as well. Because, again, non-compete clauses just really don't exist at this point. So Harry designed a car for Empire, but really the more important part is he made some contacts at the same time. Because the people that had started Empire Motor Car Company had also started another business venture. They'd set up a racetrack. And they were currently running small circuit races through racing seasons, and were having some issues with attendance. You see, as the season went on, the attendance would get lower and lower for each race, and the owners of the track were starting to realize that this wasn't quite as profitable as they'd hoped it would be. So they hatched up one brilliant idea. They were going to host a race that was one time per year. It was going to be a massive event, it was going to be an extremely long endurance race, and it was going to end up having the largest cash prize in all of American racing history up to that point. So they pitched the idea for their 500-mile long endurance race on the Indianapolis Raceway to Harry. And Harry got super excited about it. He ended up signing up on the spot to go to this race. And the problem was that at the time, Harry's handcrafted cars weren't going to be fast enough to pass qualifying, and therefore he wasn't actually going to be able to compete in this race that he just signed up for. And that's right, you guessed it, this would be the inaugural run of the Indianapolis 500 that Harry Stutz just signed up for without a car, with only 5 weeks until race day. Now if you're Harry Stutz and you don't have a car, there's a pretty simple formula that's been tried and tested a couple times. And so Harry just decided he was going to end up following the same formula. He was going to build himself an all-new car. It didn't matter that he only had 5 weeks to do it. He'd already done it twice. Why not just do it again? And so 5 weeks later, on race day, Harry Stutz shows up to Indianapolis 500's inaugural run with the Bearcat, a car that he had hand-built over the course of 5 weeks. 46 cars showed up to Indy 500, of which only 40 passed qualifying. And by the end of the day, when the flag finally dropped, 26 cars had finished the race, with Harry Stutz Bearcat taking 11th place and earning it the title of the car that made good in a day. Now Harry was a businessman who knew when to capitalize on a good thing, so he called up an old friend, and they started Ideal Motor Car Company in response to the race. And just 1 year later, in 1912, Ideal Motor Car Company released a short wheelbase, high horsepower, low center of gravity sports car named the Bearcat. The production Bearcat was almost a carbon copy of Stutz's own race car design, with some fenders and lights added on just to make it road legal. In 1913, again, only a year later, Stutz renamed the company from Ideal Motor Car to Stutz Motor Car Company. And the Bearcat continued production from 1912 all the way through 1925. The Bearcat itself had a fantastic track record, where the 1912 season of racing, the Bearcat saw 25 wins out of the 30 races that it participated in. And in 1915, Irwin Cannonball Baker ended up taking a stock Bearcat from California to New York in just 11 days, 7 hours, and 15 minutes, thus starting the entire legend of the Cannonball Run. Harry left Stutz Motor Car Company in 1919 to go pursue the dream of opening a second car company, which didn't really achieve any success, and later in life he ended up developing his own fire engine company that saw enough success that he worked there for the remainder of his career. As for the Bearcat and Stutz Motor Car Company itself, the company changed hands multiple times through the rest of its days, and inevitably went downhill in the early 30s, going down in history as the only automotive company in history to be found guilty, not once, but twice, of attempting to manipulate the stock market. As for Harry, he moved to Florida and traded in his older model wife for a younger version, and lived there for the remainder of his days, which didn't end up being that long because he died at the age of 52 to a burst appendix. And if that 52 number isn't some foreshadowing, I don't know what is. But that brought a close to the lifetime story of the man who turned wrenches, lived the American dream, and invented the sports car while he was at it. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. See you next time. Yeah, that really is just the most anticlimactic way to go out there.